Hi everyone, my name is Jen and I work for Ontario Power Generation in Niagara. We own and operate a number of hydroelectric generating stations and I'm excited to present this information to you today. As we learn about the significance of water this week, let us also reflect on the land on which we gather, understand the history of the land on which we live, and that provides us with this precious resource of water. Niagara region is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hydroelectric, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Niagara Children's Water Festival stands with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship on the lands on which we live and the water which sustains us. I'm going to go through a presentation with you today and go through this exciting model with you that I'm very excited to show you. So first, in our presentation today, what is hydro? So hydro means water. So hydroelectricity is electricity made from water. And I know that can kind of be confusing because those two things don't usually go together, right? We usually say, dry your hands before you plug something in, or I'm telling my kids, don't blow dry your hair while someone is running the sink. Okay, so I'm going to tell you today how we make electricity safely using water. So across the province, OPG has many hydroelectric stations. As far south as Niagara, where we are, upwards to Timmins and Thunder Bay, even far north to Kenora, so back country areas. We have small hydroelectric stations, such as the one you're seeing on the screen. Some of them might house one, maybe 2 or 3 generating units, and usually they're situated up north on a river system. So in the photo that you're seeing, there's a yellow, what looks kind of like a string or a big rope running across from side to side. And that's actually a safety boom. It's yellow to grab your attention, and they're big barrels that float on the water, and they're meant to keep you away from the station. So while the water appears calm on the surface, we're actually drawing a lot of water into the station, so it's actually quite turbulent underneath. So that's a safety barrier to keep you back away from the station. Now in Niagara, we have 2 large hydroelectric generating stations. The smaller one on the right of your screen is Stratumbeck Generating Station number 1, and the one on the left side of your screen is Stratumbeck Generating Station number 2. Number 1 is in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and number 2 is in Niagara Falls. So they're right on the border of the town and the city. We take water from 3 tunnels and 1 open cut canal that runs through the city of Niagara Falls. So they take water from the upper Niagara River and it runs all the way through the city to our station. We run the water through our station and it exits into the Niagara River. So we're actually just borrowing the water. Now, in the city of St. Catharines, we have 2 generating stations at the base of the escarpment below Brock University. So if you've been in the area, maybe you've seen the large pipes. They're called penstocks that run from the top of the escarpment all the way down. But you might not have seen these 2 little stations tucked in the valley. The water exits the stations into almost the start of the 12-mile creek and runs through the city of St. Catharines. Now, before it gets to Lake Ontario, it flows through Martindale Pond and into this little station tucked in Port Dalhousie. So if you live in the area, or maybe you've visited the carousel in Port Dalhousie, this little station is run by the city of St. Catharines, and it's right at the outflow from Martindale Pond into Lake Ontario. So you know that when you're firing up something in your house, you're plugging in something, maybe one of these generators in the Niagara region is helping to power what you're turning on in your home. So, how exactly do we get electricity from water safely? So, let's start with the basics, which you may have learned already in class. Anytime a wire passes through a magnetic field, electricity is produced in that wire. Now, I'm not going to explain the rest to you. I have a really good video that's going to show that to you in just 2 minutes. So here's the video for you.
"170,000 cubic meters of water flow past here every minute at almost 60 kilometers per hour. That's enough water to fill about 100,000 Olympic swimming pools every day. Standing here, you can actually feel the power of the water. Harnessing that power is what hydroelectric stations have been designed to do for over 100 years in Ontario. In essence, they are factories that convert the energy of falling water into the flow of electrons, or what is commonly called electricity, the electricity that powers the province. Most hydroelectric stations use either water diverted around the natural drop of a river, such as a waterfall or rapids, or a dam is built across a river to raise the water level and provide the drop needed to create a driving force. Water at the higher level is collected in the forebay. It flows through the plant intake into a pipe called a penstock, which carries it down to a turbine water wheel at the lower water level. The water pressure increases as it flows down the penstock. It is this pressure and flow that drives the turbine that is connected to the generator. Inside the generator is the rotor that is spun by the turbine. Large electromagnets are attached to the rotor located within coils of copper wire called a stator. As the generator rotor spins the magnets, a flow of electrons is created in the coils of the stator. This produces electricity that can be stepped up in voltage through the station transformers and sent across transmission lines. The falling water, having served its purpose, exits the generating station to the tail race, where it rejoins the main stream of the river to continue the cycle of creating clean, renewable energy for Ontario.
Okay, so it's a fairly simple process, though the inner workings of the station are much more technical. But for our purpose today, it's a fairly straightforward process. So back to my presentation, you saw this diagram in the video. So the water is collected in the forebay. So we need lots of water, which flows in from our open cut canal. And talking about our Surratt and Beck station, so the open cut canal and the tunnels brings the water into our forebay. We need the pipe, that penstock, so it needs to be big and it needs to be fairly high. We need that water to run through the station with full force to hit that water wheel, to make it spin really fast, to get the generator working for us, to make the electricity, to send it to your homes. So thinking about your home, what do you use in your home? What uses electricity in your home? Why do we need to create or make so much hydroelectricity? So think about things like lights, televisions, all sorts of stuff. You may even have an electric vehicle, or maybe that's coming down the road, but there's all sorts of things that we need to light up your home. Now, I can't end my presentation without talking about water safety. Because we use the water, because our generating stations are on the waterways, we need to make sure that people are being safe around our stations. So that's why we have that yellow boom, that big yellow rope in front of our stations. We have safety signs around them to warn you to stay clear and stay safe. So that means in the vicinity, so in the area of a hydro generating station, no skating, no boating, no fishing. And in the winter time, so when there's ice on the surface, you know, our fire departments are really good at sharing the message, no ice is safe ice, and that is especially true around a generating station. We always say, and I said at the beginning, it's what lies beneath that calm looking surface. So even while there could be ice, because the water is always moving underneath, it's never safe ice. So please, if you see our stations locally, or especially up north where you can get a little bit closer, make sure you stay clear and stay safe. So we're going to move on to this really cool looking model behind me. I'm really excited to have it this year because it's brand new and you're going to discover it with me today. So for our purpose today, we're going to label this. And it's not exactly as the diagram showed you, but for your reference, this is how we're going to work with it today. So this piece here is going to be our water intake. This is going to be the headworks where the water comes in. These red things here, these are going to be our dams. So we're going to open and close the dam to use the water when we need it. This is our generator here, so that's going to work for us. I'm going to tuck this right here. And our turbine is the water wheel. So I'm just going to send this right there. These are our transformers, so the wires. Okay, so we know that this is working when these lights turn on, and it's going to send the electricity to your homes. So when this machine turns on and the generator works, these lights are going to turn on. So pay attention to that. And then this is our tail race. So this is where the water comes out to join the river system. So remember, we're just borrowing the water and then sending it back into the environment. Okay, so, and our penstock. We can't have a station without these big pipes. Remember the photo of DeQ, the pipes running down the escarpment? That's what this will be today. So let's fire this up. So at OPG, when we need to start or stop a generator, we have operators that will do this. So let's say our operator gets a call. It's first thing in the morning, and people are getting up. Maybe they're turning on the television to watch some news. They're firing up the stove, making their cup of coffee, firing up their iPad with the charge in. We need a little bit of power. So I'm going to turn this on. Make sure I've got my dam is open. I'm going to turn this on, and so you want to watch the screen that the lights are turning on, okay? So let's fire this up and see if we can make some electricity. Okay, so now our operators, it's dinner time. They're getting a message saying we need lots of electricity. People are home from work. It's a really hot day. They're firing up their air conditioners. They're making dinner. They're working on the computer. We need more electricity, so we need to run another generator. So we're going to open this dam and fire up this generator. And so now we have two running. Okay, so it's the end of the night. We don't need very much electricity. We're going to turn one off. Now, what happens if we have to work on the generators? It's the fall. We need to work on this. We need to fix some pieces of these two units in our station. We're going to turn both of them off and let all the water work its way through so that we can work on these units. Because a very big part of what we do is maintaining and refurbishing our assets. So in plain terms, that means we need to work on these generators regularly to fine-tune them, make sure that they work well. And practice makes perfect. So the more we work on these generators, the more efficient or the more the better use we can make of these generators. So I'm sure you have some questions. Nicole, any questions for me?
That was awesome, Jen. I love the model. It was so interactive. That was great. So we actually do have a couple questions. From Mrs. Hoffman's grade 3 class, they're asking, how many hydroelectric generating stations does OPG own and operate?
Great question. So in Niagara, we have 5 stations. So there's DeQ, the 2 DeQ stations I showed you in St. Catharines, the 2 stations in Niagara Falls, plus there's a pump generating station that actually works very similar to this one. So it pumps water into a reservoir and then pumps the water, uses the water to make electricity and then sends it back towards our stations to use. Across the province, we have 66 hydroelectric generating stations, mostly on the smaller end. Ottawa St. Lawrence is in a large size like our Surratt and Beck stations.
Awesome. That was great to know that you guys have 5 that you own and operate, and there's 60 across Ontario. That's amazing. So we actually do have another question as well. Mr. Putton's grade 4 class in Welland, they ask, how many homes do the generating stations in Niagara power?
So in Niagara, our hydroelectric operations power about 2 million homes. So when you turn on a light switch at home tonight, you can think that one of our generators is helping to power your home.
Awesome. And Miss Gilchrist's grade 3-4 class in St. Catharines would like to know, where is the closest generating station to us and how old is it?
Okay, so in the Surratt-and-Beck station, so Surratt-and-Beck 1, that smaller one in Niagara-on-the-Lake, is 100 years old as of this year. And in St. Catharines, that DeQ station, that longer station, was built in 1898, first to service power requirements in Hamilton, and that one will be 125 years old next year.
Wow, that is old. And from Mr. Jenkinson's grade 2-3 class, they're curious about the location of the Sir Adam Beck station and why is it so far from the actual falls?
Okay, so a lot of people often think that our stations are at the falls if they're not familiar where it's actually situated, which is closer to Queenston Heights. And so at the falls, there's a drop. So from the top, just to say road level to river level, is a shorter drop than where we are further down the river. So our drop is more significant. It's a higher drop, which means that we can rely on gravity and the force of that water. So they call it head, so from top to bottom, so that we can create more power, more force to turn our turbine, our water wheel, because of that greater distance. So that's why it was built further down the river instead of right at the falls.
Wow, it's so important to have gravity and what it does for your systems. That's awesome. Mr. Lingerfelt's class is wondering, what will happen if we run out of water or a river runs dry?
So if a river runs dry, that would be problematic. So up north, for example, it's all of the river systems are part of a watershed. So we rely on snow and rain to fill those bodies of water. And in fact, our operators and our control rooms that operate our generating stations up north, they're situated in Niagara. And a big part of what they do is managing the flow of water. So that means in some areas, just to say we didn't have a lot of water, a lot of precipitation one spring, they may have to open and close dams in certain areas to allow more water in. If we had too much water, they may close the dams to slowly allow water to pass. Now, if for some reason our river totally dried up, that may put one of our generators out of business, and we'd have to find other ways, creative ways to create power. So in our business, we also have nuclear power and solar power, so we might rely on those sources. But hopefully that doesn't happen.
Awesome. Good thing that you guys plan ahead. So from Mrs. Nash's grade 4 class, they're wondering, how does water transfer up the pipe?
So, in our pump generating station, I'm going to assume our pump generating station. So water typically doesn't go reverse up the pipe, except at our pump generating station in Niagara Falls, we have a big reservoir. So if you're driving down the highway, it would be before you get to the border on your right side. So often you'll just see what looks like a big pile of gravel on the side, and that's housing a big reservoir in behind. So this, just to say we take this, for example, so the pump generating station uses other types of pipes and pumps to pump up water into the reservoir. Then in times where there's high demand, we need lots of electricity, all of our units at our Surratt-and-Beck stations are running, but we need more, we can use this station. So from here, the water is pumped up into their own type of penstocks to run through the generators, and then it's released back out of the reservoir and into the open cut canal system to the Beck stations. I know that's kind of complicated, but there's other ways to use the water so that we're, again, just borrowing it for a small use and then sending it back out to where we need it. So the pump generating station allows us to use the water twice. Once at the pump generating station, and then again at the Surratt-and-Beck stations.
Great. That was a great answer, Jen. And Mrs. Nash's class has another question for you. This one might be a little bit tricky, but they're wondering, how many houses does one generator light?
Oh, that's a tough call. So we usually say, how many, well, it would be much less than one generator. One generator, so if one generator, just to throw it out there, is 100 megawatts, it would power about 1,000 homes.
Awesome. And Miss Inglis's grade 2-3 class, they have a little bit of a tricky question for you as well. How long does it take the water to create electricity, and how far does the water have to fall?
Well, some of our stations, so up north, let's take up north for example, because the stations are smaller, and some of them are called run-of-the-river stations. So there would be a generating unit that would be in that station that would handle the amount of water that comes in. So the pipe doesn't have to be that long, but the longer it is, the more force it can create in the generator to turn the wheel. So it can produce more electricity. So smaller stations may, their generators may only be 1 megawatt. In our Surratt and Beck stations, you're looking at, say, 60 megawatts instead of 1 megawatt. Stations up north where there is, well, let me use it local. Our DQ stations where there's a good drop from the top of the escarpment to where the station actually is, 77 megawatts. So these numbers might not mean a lot to you, but it gives you a range from 1 to 77. So it all depends on how much water we have, how much of a drop we have. So the shorter the drop, the less force, the less power we're going to be able to produce.
Perfect. Thanks, Jen. And Mrs. B's grade 3 class, they're wondering, what happens when you turn off the generators to clean them? Does all the power get turned off?
No. So we call these outages. So when we need to take a generator out of service, we would call it an outage, and we plan for these things. Now, if it's unplanned, power requirements would be sent elsewhere across the province. So all generators are not running at all times. So at the Surratt and Beck stations, in total between the two, there are 26 generating units. Now at Surratt and Beck 1, there are 2 out right now, so that they plan for that. So that means that if they needed all 16 units, but 2 are out of service, they will find that power elsewhere in the province. So it might mean running that pump generating station or running our stations up north more. So generating units are called upon to work when the power is needed. So if it's a day when everyone's got their windows open and no one's running air conditioners, we don't need all that much power. So maybe 4 of our units won't be running. Or a small station up north, maybe that won't be running. But later in the day when we need that electricity, it's gotten hot inside, we're running the air conditioners, those units might be called upon to do the work.
Awesome. And we have another question from Miss McDonough's grade 4 class, and they're wondering, how big are these generators?
Oh, some of them are huge. So at the Surratt and Beck stations, in the video you saw Jim Schatt, who was the host of the video, walking along the floor in Surratt and Beck 2 in these big yellow generating units. That's just the top of it. So what's below that floor is the big turbine and the shaft, like doing all of the work, the big guts of the work. So when you're walking on the floor, it's noisy, but when you go below that floor, it's really loud. So those units are really big. Other generating stations, those smaller run-of-the-river stations, the units are smaller. At the DQ generating station, the units are really big, but they look different. They're called horizontal generators. And most of the components of the generator are on one level. so you get to see it all. That's a really great photo. If you're able to look it up in your class, it's called a horizontal generator, and they're fairly big. And I always say one of the coolest things about these, about the older generating stations, actually 80% of our stations, or most of our stations, are over 80 years old. So that's a testament to the work to keep these up. But what's really interesting is to see the inner workings of them. The bolts used to put them together are huge. You know, the components are really big because they're impressive pieces of metal.
Awesome. And we have another question from Mr. Lingerfelt's class again. And they're wondering, can we store hydroelectricity for later use?
No, so that's actually a technology that they're looking at now. Hydro has to be used when it's produced. That's why our operators have such an important job to put generators to work when it's needed most. So they are on staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, they're looking at battery storage for future use, but it's still being researched and still being looked at to see whether it's effective and whether it would work well and whether it would be worth the money spent on the technology versus being able to produce the power. So it's kind of a bigger conversation, and it is being looked at. They're looking at something called small modular reactors, which are small nuclear reactors, and the battery storage. But again, sorry, that's getting into to a bigger topic, but that's a great question. So not for hydro just yet.
Awesome. I'm so glad to learn that you guys are looking into that stuff. So we have another question from Mr. R's grade 4-5 class, and they're wondering how many people work in the Niagara Falls location in one day?
Oh, so we've got about 200 people. 200 people that support our local operations. So we call all the stations in Niagara, so the Beck stations, our international control dam, which is above the falls, and the pump station and DQ stations, we call that all Niagara operations. And there's about 200 people that specifically support those operations. We also have a larger team within OPG that supports special projects, environment. We call dam safety as a big group. So that puts us up to over 100 people that support within Niagara.
Wow, that's a lot of people. And we have another question from Miss Nash's grade 4 class again. They're wondering, how long does it take to build a generator?
Oh, so I'm going to talk to you about two things. So an actual generator at Stratum Beck 1 right now, we've completely replaced 2 generators, and the process has been a few years in the making. It is a very technical process. They had to take the entire generating unit out, and as I mentioned before, it's not just what's on the surface, it's what's below a few floors. So they completely took out the old unit and put it in. And I'll tell you, one of the coolest things to watch is bringing in these large components, so bringing in what Jim referred to as the stator, so the big magnets, and watching a crane put it into place with such precision that there's the tiniest gap between the concrete surround and that stator going in. It's a fine skill. So that process is a few years. If you were to create a whole generating station from scratch, from start to finish, between consulting with our First Nations communities, our neighbors, to opening the doors, it might be 10 years. It's a big process because we have to consider our neighbors and the environment, and it's not just a matter of putting up a building and the generators in it. It's a big process. So let me be generous and say 10 years.
Awesome. And we only have time for one more question. So this is from Miss Inglis's class. How much water would it take to power an entire city using hydroelectricity?
Oh,
it's a tricky one.
Okay. So how much water would it take? You know what? I don't know. That is a great question, and I will find out the answer for you. How much water would it take? It would take a lot of water. I can't answer that. That's such a great question. I will leave that for now, but I will commit to getting back to you on that because I want to give you an answer for that one.
Perfect. And that's good because we still have a couple more questions rolling in, but unfortunately we're out of time. So Jen and her team will definitely get back to you and we'll email you all the answers.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Jen, for such a wonderful presentation. And thank you guys for joining us here at the 2022 Niagara Children's Water Festival.